Canada's communist.
Canada's crazy.
They're They got to get rid of that guy.
How much time does he have? I feel like he's been prime minister for a while. Am I wrong?
I don't.
Justin Trudeau emerged on the political scene as an emblematic figure of change, a leader who promised modernity, inclusion, and a renewed connection to Canadian values. His rise to power was a media phenomenon. As the son of one of Canada's most iconic prime ministers, Pierre Trudeau, Justin carried the weight of a legacy. But it wasn't just his lineage. It was his ability to connect with people, his eloquence, and his carefully crafted image that made him a symbol of hope. However, the initial perception of him as a visionary progressive began to crack over time. Trudeau soon revealed that behind the charisma and captivating smile lay a leader whose actions often failed to match his words. Gradually, the fissures in his administration became evident, and promises that once seemed attainable turned into fading illusions. One of the early warning signs was his insistence on prioritizing symbolic politics over tangible results. Canadians started to notice that while Trudeau excelled at delivering emotionally charged speeches, his government's policies often failed to translate into meaningful improvements in their daily lives. This became evident in his handling of critical issues such as the economy, the environment, and international relations. On the economic front, Trudeau promised Canadians inclusive prosperity, but reality soon contradicted him. Under his administration, the housing crisis reached alarming levels. Cities like Vancouver and Toronto, already struggling with housing market pressures, saw prices soar beyond the reach of the working class. Despite announcing initiatives to build affordable housing, many of these promises either remained on paper or progressed at a frustratingly slow pace. Meanwhile, the cost of living in Canada rose significantly. Inflation, driven by global factors but exacerbated by a lack of clear national strategy, left many families struggling to make ends meet. Trudeau attempted to address these concerns with temporary solutions like tax incentives and short-term subsidies, but critics argued these measures were insufficient to tackle the root of the problem. In environmental matters, Trudeau positioned himself as a champion of climate change action, signing international agreements and committing to reducing carbon emissions. Yet his government continued to approve oil pipeline expansion projects, sparking outrage among environmentalists. This contradiction between his words and actions undermined his credibility and alienated many of his initial supporters. Trudeau's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic marked a turning point in his leadership. While he initially received praise for his swift response and financial support for affected individuals and businesses, his approach grew inconsistent as the crisis wore on. Policies related to vaccination and restrictions created divisions in the country, culminating in the truckers' convoy protests, an event that exposed deep fractures within Canadian society. The protests reflected not just dissatisfaction with Trudeau's specific policies but also a broader rejection of what many perceived as his authoritarian leadership style. His decision to invoke the Emergencies Act to address the demonstrations was widely criticized, both by those who saw it as unnecessary and by those who viewed it as an abuse of power. Internationally, Trudeau has faced significant challenges. His desire to project Canada as a global leader in human rights and climate change has often been overshadowed by incidents questioning his seriousness as a statesman. The viral spread of a video showing Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni appearing to ignore his comments during a summit was a recent example of how other leaders perceive him. As Trudeau strives to stand out on the global stage, unresolved domestic issues erode his authority. Over the years, Trudeau has faced multiple scandals that have damaged his reputation. Among the most notable was the revelation of photos and videos showing him wearing blackface makeup on multiple occasions, an incident that sparked international outrage. Although he issued public apologies, the incident highlighted a disconnect between his progressive image and his past actions. Another critical point has been his relationship with Indigenous communities. Trudeau promised to prioritize reconciliation and address the historical injustices suffered by these communities. However, his government has been accused of slow progress in implementing these policies. The discovery of unmarked graves at former residential schools became a heartbreaking reminder of the government's continued failure to protect and empower these communities. On platforms like Joe Rogan's podcast, Trudeau has become a frequent target of criticism. Rogan, known for his straightforward style and vast global audience, has pointed out what he sees as the Prime Minister's hypocrisies and failures. These criticisms have resonated with a wider audience, amplifying discontent with Trudeau beyond Canada's borders. Trudeau's decline in the polls reflects a shift in public perception. What was once seen as fresh and promising leadership is now viewed as an administration marked by inconsistencies, scandals, and a focus on image over substance. Each public misstep, from unfortunate comments to gestures that seem calculated for the cameras, feeds the narrative that Trudeau is disconnected from the realities Canadians face. The future of Trudeau as a leader is uncertain. While some still defend him as a well-meaning politician facing monumental challenges, others see his time in office as a missed opportunity for real change. With elections on the horizon and a strengthened opposition, Trudeau faces a critical test. Ultimately, Trudeau's legacy will depend not only on how he addresses current challenges but also on whether he can regain the public's trust. His leadership story is a lesson in the dangers of prioritizing perception over action and how charisma alone is insufficient to effectively govern. As Justin Trudeau faces growing challenges to his leadership, it is essential to delve into the factors that have shaped not only his time in office but also the public's perception of his government. One of the central elements of this story is how the combination of his family legacy and personal charisma initially gave him a unique advantage in Canada's political landscape. But as time has shown, an initial advantage does not always translate into sustained success. The surname Trudeau carries significant weight in Canada. Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin's father, left a lasting legacy, particularly through the introduction of the Multiculturalism Act and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This background not only set high expectations for Justin but also generated media fascination around his political ascent. However, this fascination was soon replaced by more intense scrutiny, particularly when his administration's results failed to meet its promises. Trudeau's leadership story is largely one of contrast. On one hand, there is his ability to captivate audiences with eloquent and emotionally resonant speeches. On the other hand, there is the reality of leadership that often seems more focused on public perception than on the effective implementation of policies. This became evident on numerous occasions, from his international travels to his handling of domestic crises. One example that illustrates this dichotomy was his trip to India in 2018. What began as an opportunity to strengthen diplomatic relations quickly turned into a media spectacle criticized for being superficial. Images of Trudeau and his family dressed in traditional attire at multiple events were widely ridiculed, not just in Canada but internationally. What could have been a strategic diplomatic mission ended up reinforcing the perception that his approach prioritized form over substance. Back in Canada, internal tensions continued to grow. The truckers' convoy protests were not an isolated event but a symptom of deeper dissatisfaction that had been building for years. Many of the criticisms directed at Trudeau during this period highlighted his apparent unwillingness to engage with those who did not share his views. Instead of seeking solutions to unite the country, his actions were often perceived as polarizing, feeding into divisions already palpable in Canadian society. Indigenous communities, which initially saw Trudeau as a potential ally, also expressed their disillusionment. While his government adopted a more inclusive approach than his predecessors, many Indigenous leaders pointed out that the commitments made did not translate into tangible changes. For example, the lack of access to clean drinking water in several Indigenous communities remains a persistent problem despite repeated promises to resolve this crisis. This failure not only underscored his administration's limitations but also called into question his commitment to reconciliation. The environment is another area where Trudeau's actions have been contradictory. Although he presented himself as a passionate advocate for combating climate change, his support for pipeline projects drew criticism from environmentalists and activists. For many, this symbolized the disconnect between his progressive rhetoric and his governmental decisions. In a world where climate action is increasingly urgent, this lack of consistency became a source of frustration for those who initially trusted him as a leader of genuine change. As his tenure progressed, the pressure from a more organized political opposition began to mount. Leaders like Pierre Poilievre of the Conservative Party seized every opportunity to highlight Trudeau's perceived failures. Poilievre, known for his direct style and sharp critiques, has used social media and digital platforms to connect with a younger and more diverse audience, eroding Trudeau's support base. Social media, in fact, has played a crucial role in shaping perceptions of Trudeau. While he initially used these platforms to project a modern and accessible image, the narrative has shifted over time. Now, memes, viral videos, and critical comments dominate the conversation, showcasing a less favorable side of his leadership. On the international stage, Canada's relationship with the United States under Trudeau's administration has been a roller coaster. While he initially managed to maintain a cordial relationship with then-President Barack Obama, the years of Donald Trump brought significant challenges. Trudeau became a frequent target of Trump's criticisms, exacerbating tensions between the two countries. Although Joe Biden's presidency alleviated some of these tensions, the dynamic remains complex, particularly regarding trade and environmental issues. In hindsight, Justin Trudeau's tenure reflects the inherent difficulties of leading a diverse and dynamic country like Canada. While he has made strides in areas such as gender equality and cabinet representation, his failures in other areas have left an indelible mark on his legacy. What began as a promise of renewal and hope has become a reminder of the challenges of governing in an era of exceedingly high expectations and constant scrutiny. Trudeau remains a polarizing figure, beloved by some and deeply criticized by others. His ability to emotionally connect with people is undeniable, but the question persists, is charisma enough to guide a nation through times of crisis? As Canada's political landscape continues to evolve, one thing is clear: Justin Trudeau's impact on the country's history will be debated for years to come.